Everyone hear me all right? Okay. Well, hello, good afternoon. I am very pleased to be here in this lovely country for the very first time and speaking to you about such a favorite topic. My background is in engineering and design. Over the last several years, these two domains have converged happily so in the space of empathy by the numbers. What I'd like to do today is, as much as possible, as much as you're interested in doing so, have a conversation. And so, should you have any questions, there's no need to wait till the end. We'll be going through a fair amount of material, and you can either raise your hand and speak up, or there's a microphone that can be passed around. So please don't hesitate. So in our talk today, we'll move the conversation on empathy from the conceptual and strategic to a more practical and tactical one. And in addition to that, we'll look at how to increase the magnitude of your practice, your actionable empathy practice. We'll look at ways to do this through a step-by-step example. One thing I would like us to keep in mind is I'm trying to achieve the goal of something out of the ordinary. Hopefully you'll agree that this approach of using best practices and real-world examples is a bit different. It's not science. I'm not particularly using a known method, and for that matter, it's not art. In the spirit of doing things by the numbers, this is me by the numbers. My background is as an entrepreneur and as a digital product designer. I also try to, in some way, give back in a meaningful way. Currently, I'm working on these two things, my empathy-driven book, as well as the AI engine I'm referring to, the empathy engine. I have two affiliations. My consultancy is Empathico, and I'm represented by TopTal. And it's a global network of experts in software development, design, project management, and finance, working with some top companies around the world. And they've developed a significant international community of professionals who work remotely. So this is the high-level view of what we're talking about today. It's the system in three phases. And it shows, hopefully, in an illustrative fashion, some of the things we'll be stepping through. Let me just also mention, with an interest in AI neural networks, if you can think of this in terms of a neural network, where we have the hidden layer processing and the various inputs, or a single input and a single output. A principal part of this methodology or system is user surveys. And with that interest, I'd like to include you in one, ask you if you disagree or agree with this question. I'm amazed how much work there's being done with empathy, all those that agree with the statement. And those who disagree. Any that have a neutral point of view. Okay. One more question. How about this? I'm tired of all the talk going on about empathy. Agree? Okay. Interesting. Those who disagree? And those that have no particular opinion. So one of the things that we'll try to implement is this inversion. We'll look at things from two different points of view to really give us a bit more clarity as we go through the methodology, as we create our questions. All right, so let's think about this simple question. Kat King took a wonderful deep look at this yesterday. And for all of you empathy fans, of which I'm one, I hope you too have had a chance to talk with her. But let's take a brief moment to answer the question, what's empathy, in a somewhat different way. For illustrative purposes, I've used this on many occasions to basically put empathy in the context of sympathy and compassion. Three terms that can often be, let's say, confused with one another. Using a baseline of feelings, building upon that which is sympathy, we add understanding to EuroIA, simply add empathy. So the two together, feeling and understanding, added with, or adding action, EuroIA compassion. So in addition to a combined background of engineering and design, my ethnic background is a combination of Japanese and Turkish. And I've lived and worked in Japan for a few years and have a deep appreciation for the culture. However, I've never created a haiku. So this is my first. It's a user-centered and empathy-driven haiku. Focus on people, appreciate perspective, and see what's needed. It's in the standard 5-7-5 syllable format. I'd like to ask the audience again, who would self-describe themselves in what particular role? So who see themselves as information architects? And as designers? Researchers? And let's call it other. Okay. Anyone wish of the other category? Anyone wish to share what you would self-describe as?
Lecturer.
Lecturer, excellent. Anyone else? Content strategist. Okay, excellent. But I would like to think that we are all in the business of pain management. And typically this represents pain points and problem statements, but I would like to think of in our state, in our system, more in terms of negative feelings and unmet needs. One way to look at this is this saying, solve the problem right. Solve the right problem in order to solve the problem right. Or you can think of it another way. The real problem is finding the real problem. You may have heard reference to Einstein. I'm not sure exactly how accurate this is, but he was presented with a question: if you had 1 hour to save the world, save a problem that the world was facing, how would you spend that time? And he basically said, reportedly, supposedly, that 55 minutes would be spent addressing the problem, and 5 minutes would be in actually solving it. The basic arc of this approach goes from people's stories to an empathy-driven system. Stories create some of the most memorable shared experiences. It's what captivates and retains people's thoughts. A bit of my story. My home is the Seattle area. In an average year, we get more rainfall than just about any other major city in the western half of the United States. It feels a lot like Dublin, or actually Ireland, referred to as the Emerald City. Anyone here from Seattle? Okay. Anyone here from the western US? Okay. This is what happened last month. Well, the display makes it look even more severe, but it was indeed rather apocalyptic. The air quality index, or AQI, reached 220, making it the worst in the world for a few days. Just for reference, an AQI of 150 is equal to smoking 7 cigarettes a day. So this got me really thinking about air pollution. Something other cities suffer much more. And so step number one in our system, or in the process, is, as mentioned, personal stories. So this is an actual story written by someone in Shanghai. And if you pay particular attention to the colored passages, take the sick days, check the air quality, and so on, and in particular the red, you can extract certain useful information, specific metrics, such as air quality index, or AQI, exercise opportunities, and social opportunities. Does anyone know who Marshall Rosenberg is? Anyone familiar with nonviolent communications? Okay, there was actually a few references, I believe, in conference talks this week to Marshall Rosenberg, or at least nonviolent communications. And he is an American psychologist, author, mediator, and teacher. Among his accomplishments, he created a more expressive vocabulary for human feelings and needs. And after I took some time to research and review his work, I have adapted his feelings and needs inventories for a number of applications. And so, arriving at this, this is the catalog, if you will, the adapted catalog of human feelings of a positive nature. You'll notice that in these four groupings, they're numbered 1 to 4, and that's actually demonstrating or depicting the severity, if you will. So starting from 1 and ending at 4. Think of these as weightings, if you like. And the inverse is, of course, to have negative feelings. Now, this is a graph. Hopefully you can see some of this. This graphic is something, for those who are interested, that I created in Sketch. The Sketch app, that is, that depicts not only these feelings, but portrays them in a way that, as I call them, shows these inverse relationships as stacks, tracks. Positive to negative, for example, joyful to sad, if you look in the center cluster. And you'll also notice the values. We're talking about 1 to 4, but also -1 to -4. And this is the way that we'll use to score, to really add number and add number to our system and to make it trackable. Any questions on this? The next step is to select feelings and needs. One feeling from each side of a compass track, we just looked at that, within our compass, feelings compass, and one need from each pyramid level. So the feelings are structured as such, and we've now selected the first feeling that was included within a person's story. That writer admitted that they were depressed. If we look at the other negative categories or groupings, and we pick one that's appropriate to as per our discretion for each, and do so also with the positive groupings, we now have completed our selection of feelings. And we'll look at how this will all come together shortly. And as we move into needs selection, let me offer you my second haiku. Focus on people. Describe what they truly need. Help others to care. Again, 5, 7, 5 syllables. So I'd like to say, or I'd like to believe, that we all share needs. In fact, I would call this humanity's common thread. This is something that we can all subscribe to regardless of our backgrounds and experiences. And this is depicted in this very Abraham Maslow-esque representation. His hierarchy of needs. But I've restructured that, and I'm hoping that you can all see this well enough. I've restructured that in a way that I think is more contemporary and also applicable within the context of our system. Let me say again, if I haven't made it clear, that this is very adaptable. And what I've described as being things that fall into this baseline of being alive, as far as air, food, water, shelter, or going up through to a level, if you will, of enlightenment at the very top, of being your best, those can all be modified for your needs. And I encourage you to consider being able to do so for your needs. Your needs may be industry specific, it may be for a specific curriculum or a theme. Back in last year, I was a part of a consortium of 11 companies that went to Japan on a AI technician. And we had the opportunity to get in front of some big companies, including SoftBank, who is a major wireless carrier, among other things. And so this inventory was adapted towards SoftBank's needs. Imagine, if you will, a company that has tens of millions of customers. And so how do you have that dialogue? How do you communicate with your customer on some meaningful basis? Of course, when the opportunity presents itself, you have that one-to-one communication. But when you don't, which is typically the case, what might that look like? And so we really wanted to adapt the system to benefit that type of scale. In our case, getting back to our example, we pick from the Be Alive baseline level of our pyramid, air. And we pick from some other levels, doesn't have to be one from each, also safety and joy. Now, again, putting this all together, we can see the different needs, we can see the feelings that we selected from before, and then we're going to wire this up. We'll connect them. Let's start with air. We connect that with security and vulnerability. Let's pick safety and connect that with comfort and being upset. Exercise, as well as joy. Okay. Questions about this process or step in the process?
Why this connection?
You're using, this is a subjective thing, you're using your best judgment. Okay, so we're referring back to that original passage. And again, this is not a science per se. You are using your best judgment as a practitioner. Anyone else wondering something or another? So this is a way to restructure. Once again, we're cleaning up for clarity's sake. And it can also be visually represented as a human needs organ. So this is a generic template, and this is the specific case that we have for our example. You'll see it's very user-centered, metaphorically. And we have the 4 needs that we selected orbiting. Each of those, in turn, have their own feelings and metrics. If you wanted to, you would add more needs. If you wanted to, you could add more feelings per need. If you wanted to, you could add more metrics. But typically, at some point, it becomes unwieldy. And so there is a appropriate balance. In the next step, step 4, we create questions. And so this is going back to the survey questions. We'll create survey questions in order to get insight from our users. So for the first one, an AQI, air quality index, of under 50, that's a metric, makes you feel secure, that's a feeling, about breathing outdoor air. If we take the inverse of that, it could be a question like, you feel vulnerable not knowing the day's AQI. Looking at our second pair of questions. we focus on the needs of safety, using the metric of sick days. Our third pair, for the needs of exercise. And the fourth pair. So now we have a total of 8 questions. And by now you might be wondering, well, how many questions are necessary? Love this photo. Anyone else into owls? They always seem to be asking that question, right? Ooh. So this is in response to that how many questions question. This is a survey of surveys done by SurveyMonkey, a real survey with a sample size of 100,000. And they looked at question count, and they found out that the more questions you ask in a survey, the less time respondents spend answering each question. So when they begin speeding through or satisficing through a survey, the quality and reliability of the data suffer. And additionally, the abandonment rates increase for people taking surveys of greater than 8 minutes to complete. So in our instance, if we know that it takes about 30 seconds on average, we're going to be safe at about 4 minutes for 8 questions. Step 5. So we'll score the responses, and this is very simple. We can make this much more complex if we wanted to. But our weightings are very straightforward. We'll use the value if they agree. If they disagree, we'll take the inverse. If they have no opinion, we just won't score it. Likert scale, many of you have used something like this before. It adds greater granularity and makes the responses more finite. In our 6th step, we're going to simply calculate by totaling the values, divide by the responses, number of responses to get an average, and take the top 3 as our top results. And our 7th and final step is to prioritize the results. So these are some options. Using the highest negative values or the need with the most high value feelings. And this could be structured in the table like this. Here are some results, and what you might find the most interesting is the furthest right, the significance. We're looking for the lowest positive or the highest negative as indicators of the most significant problem. And we arrive at this as our findings. With respect to air pollution, people's biggest concern was a lack of safety. And AQI is a determinant for people's comfort level. And so it is safety which rose to the top of the greatest concerns. And we know that because of the data that we just looked at here. So safety, the 2 questions, lowest positives and highest negatives. So you might be wondering, well, how can I use this? If your problem or solution exists, you can think about this in terms of business intelligence or customer service metrics, data-driven personas, maybe process benchmarking. I am looking at this extensively for algorithm training data sets. You can also, if your solution is in the works, use it for MVP. I've done that as well, to great effect. Product specification docs, product market fit, and so on. Anybody wondering if their potential need might be a good fit for this? Anyone have a potential application in mind? Yeah. Would you mind sharing?
Me?
Did I see a hand?
Yeah, it'd be useful looking at emotions and variables.
Anybody else thought about laying in their minds? And in order to adapt or scale it, we can take a look at larger sample sizes, generalizing the surveys to broader populations, using community insight groups, as opposed to working with a select set of survey respondents or participants. You can adapt it to specific market needs. And so again, with the case of the Japanese telecom, we knew what their history was with customers, where they wanted to go in their markets. So we adapted the inventories accordingly. And as I mentioned, we're looking at this on a purely quantitative basis, but you can certainly add ethnographic studies or user interviews or whatever you prefer. So let me also mention a couple of things as we come to a close here. These slides, if you're interested, I know we went through a lot. They're available. Just let me know if you would like them. I'd be happy to get them to you. Also, as this system further develops, we are looking for people that would like to collaborate in whatever context or capacity that you find to be of interest. All right, so let me close with one last call for any questions. Please.
I probably didn't understand or follow it. Oh, thank you. I probably missed how you were getting at this, but you showed the axes on the beautiful sketch illustration, and then you assigned numbers to those axes. It seemed that some of those emotions do track to an intensity scale, whereas others don't seem to have to track to like a numerical intensity, either grading up or down.
Yeah.
And yet it seemed that you then used the up or down number in a quantitative way to assess intensity on that emotional scale. Did I read that right?
I'm not even sure which ones you're referring to, but I will readily accept.
There's one that has vulnerable in it. I think that was a good example. Can you go one more slide forward? Yeah, so my example is like, so desperate, doubtful, nervous, vulnerable, overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how vulnerable is a number 3 gradation of doubtful.
Right, of desperation. The category is desperate.
Yeah, I guess I'm still struggling to see that that's like an intensity increase.
Right. So
from doubtful.
I think that a lot of this is subjective, and I would say that in your adaptation of that, flip it around or revise it however you see fit. This is something that I've developed and tested out, and with some degree of success. It is, again, by no means science or art. It is the best hypothesis we have going forward. You're more than encouraged to change it around. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your attention. Again, if you have an interest in the slides or would like to explore some manner of collaboration, I look forward to that conversation. Thank you.